Most people don't know this, but there's a sleeping position that silently opens spiritual doors and weakens your protection even if you pray nightly. I learned this the way soldiers learn the weight of silence after battle, through experience, through the kind of night you remember more than you understand. I never believed the warnings at first. I treated them like old tales told by elders who padded every statement with fear. But the night everything changed. I had gone to bed feeling safe, convinced routine prayers wrapped me in armor. I remember the mattress giving beneath me, the blanket resting on my chest like a shield, ordinary, almost comforting. Yet when I turned onto my back, hands folded over my stomach without thinking, something shifted, not in the room, but in me. I didn't fall asleep. I drifted, as if something waited for that exact posture, that exact angle of my breathing, before approaching. And then the first sound came. A whisper. So quiet I thought it was memory speaking, dragging up voices from years I tried to forget. But the whisper replied when I breathed in. It timed itself to my pulse, settling where thought and dream overlap, but consciousness still listens. I tried to move. My fingers trembled but wouldn't obey. It felt as if the space around me thickened, like invisible hands pressed down with just enough pressure to remind me I was no longer the only one present. My chest tightened. My heart raced so loudly I thought it might wake the entire house, yet I couldn't even lift my head. And that whisper kept speaking. Not in a language but an intent, as though it waited for acknowledgement, as though silence from me counted as permission. For years, I told myself it was exhaustion. I offered every explanation except the one that matched what I felt. But here's the part I never wanted to say aloud. That was the first night I stopped praying before sleep, because I realized prayer before waking hours is useless if your posture is an invitation afterward. I'm confessing this now because I've spent too long pretending it didn't matter. Too long acting like faith alone is enough when the way you rest can undo every word you utter. What I reveal next isn't something I heard in books or sermons. It came from a voice that wasn't mine, answering a question I never asked. When the body takes this shape, the spirit lowers its guard. I didn't believe it until the second night, when I changed positions on purpose and nothing happened. Silence, peace, sleep like I hadn't felt in months. But the third night, I slipped again. And this time the whisper didn't wait. It spoke before my thoughts could settle, before my breath could slow. It was almost eager, as though recognizing me, as though it had waited. I still don't know what it wanted, but I know what it took. My certainty. Since then, every testimony I give, every moment of reflection, comes with the quiet understanding I never admit aloud. There are battles no one sees, and sometimes the first doorway opens when your body is still, your eyes are shut, and your guard is lowered by nothing more than comfort. I've never told anyone the full truth, but I will. I discovered it when I was still practicing witchcraft, and I watched believers lose battles while they slept. That is the sentence I hesitated to speak for years, because every part of it demands explanation, and every explanation leads back to what I witnessed in the quiet hours when bodies rested but spirits faced assault. Back then, I was surrounded by people who believed sleep was rest and nothing more. But in the circles I walked, sleep was studied the way generals study maps. Every angle of the spine, every position of the hands, every tilt of the head meant something. They said the body becomes a signal, and I laughed at the idea, until I saw what those signals summoned. The first time I learned the truth, I wasn't seeking power. I was seeking answers. Our meetings took place far from noise. No candles, no cloaks, nothing theatrical. Just a floor, a dim room, and instructions spoken plainly. There I was taught to watch how people rested when exhaustion overcame them during long vigils. Some curled inward like they were guarding their chest. Some slept on their side with knees drawn up, as if bracing against invisible impact. But those who slept on their backs, hands folded over their stomachs or resting at their sides, they reacted. Their breath changed first, shallow, uneven. Then their fingers twitched as though answering a question their conscious mind hadn't heard. Sometimes their eyelids fluttered rapidly, as if something stood close, so close they could sense it without waking. What I witnessed was never spoken about outside those walls. It wasn't spectacle, it was observation. We didn't make anything happen. We simply waited and watched and took note of what arrived when their posture changed. The elders, men and women who claimed decades of experience, never raised their voices, never dramatized their teachings. They just repeated one phrase as if it were a law older than memory. Some doors stay closed until the body forms the key. I didn't understand it at first. I thought they meant ritual positions, gestures, symbols. But they meant sleep, and the vulnerability in how one rests. Here is what unsettled me most. The ones affected most deeply were always those who prayed the strongest before sleep. It wasn't lack of faith. It wasn't weakness. It was that their bodies returned to a posture that signaled surrender, even when their words declared resistance. As if the flesh whispered a contradiction, the spirit had to face alone. I watched believers, people with conviction glowing in their voices, lie down with confidence, only for their expressions to shift moments later, as though encountering something they couldn't name or fight. Some clenched their jaws as if enduring interrogation. Some breathed in sharp gasps, as though confronting memories they never intended to revisit. And some, their lips moved ever so slightly, as if answering questions whispered where no other ears could hear. It took years before I understood why those moments disturbed me. I saw battles without witnesses. I saw struggles taking place while the world slept around them, while morning testimony only covered what they could remember, and not what they survived. I left that path eventually, not because I was afraid, but because I began to question what side I stood on. And the more I questioned, the more one memory returned to me with unrelenting clarity. A single night when someone prayed with force and authority, only to fall asleep in that position, back flat, hands resting open, as though giving permission without knowing. What entered the room that night, I still cannot describe without feeling the weight of it in my chest. But here's what I can confess. When I finally walked away, I vowed never again to treat sleep like silence, because silence was never empty. It was a stage where battles continued long after voices grew quiet. And now, after everything I've seen, after all I tried to forget, there is one truth I cannot rewrite, revise, or soften. Some victories are lost before morning, because the war continues when the eyes close. If you want me to reveal what happened on my final night in that world, the night everything changed for me, I will. I escaped that world years ago, but the signs I saw, the attacks I witnessed, still keep me awake at night. I didn't walk away clean. People assume escape means freedom, but sometimes it means carrying memories like packed luggage, heavy even when hidden. What followed those first encounters was more than disturbance. It was warfare that left no bruises, yet scarred deeper than wounds ever could. I learned this slowly, through nights that stretched longer than they should, through mornings where I woke feeling drained as if I fought battles no one saw. I kept silent, convinced it was better to endure than be dismissed as dramatic. But silence has a way of attracting company, especially when that company already knows your name. One night, months after the first whisper, I felt the weight return. Not on my body, on my spirit. It was the kind of pressure you recognize instantly after having felt it once. My breath shortened. The air around me felt thick, dense, unmoving. I tried to shift to my side, tried to break the posture that had betrayed me before, but something held me in place, not with force, but with familiarity. As if it remembered I once yielded. My thoughts raced, but my lips refused to form words. I tried to pray in my mind, but every phrase slipped away before completion, like wind blowing out candles one by one. And then came the voice again, closer this time, without the courtesy of hesitation. It didn't whisper to me. It spoke through me. I felt the vibration in my own throat, though my mouth remained closed. Every syllable struck like a hammer against the inner walls of my chest, echoing in places prayer rarely reaches. You were seen, you were marked, and you returned. A confession rose in me, unspoken, yet undeniable. I had gone back to that sleeping position because part of me wanted to test whether the first night was real. And in doing so, I reopened something I never should have touched again. That was the first part of the revelation. Some openings don't close simply because we walk away. I felt warmth on my right side, like someone leaning close, breath grazing the edge of my jaw. My heart hammered as though striking a signal, a warning. A plea all at once. Yet what terrified me most wasn't the presence, it was how familiar it felt. The second part of the revelation came like memory returning without permission. I had felt this over a decade earlier, before I ever knew how to name it. Back when I was younger, careless, unaware that posture could be more than posture. Something had brushed near me then too, but I dismissed it as imagination. Only now did I grasp what I truly escaped years ago. A realm where curiosity counts as surrender. The third part of the revelation struck hardest. I wasn't only attacked, I was acknowledged. Because attack is random, acknowledgement is targeted. In that moment, immobilized, breathing shallow, pulse thundering, I realized why people speak of warfare as testimony. You survive what you never wanted to face, then spend years deciding whether to reveal it. My confession is this. I once believed protection came solely through words spoken before sleep. But I learned protection is also the posture you maintain when the room grows silent and something watches without eyes. When I finally regained control, fingers first, then arms, then voice, I didn't scream, I didn't run. I turned onto my side and whispered a single sentence into the darkness, voice trembling but firm enough to mark my boundary. I won't lie still for you again. The room stayed quiet, but silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like retreat. And that's when I understood. Warfare isn't always loud. Sometimes the quiet moments are the battles you remember most. I'll continue, if you're ready. Because what happened afterward taught me why certain postures attract attention and why changing them can shift the entire battlefield. The first time I saw it, I thought it was an accident. A fleeting moment in the night when awareness flickers like a weak flame. I woke on my back again, arms resting over my chest, and the pressure returned. But this time, there were footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling my bed as though measuring the distance between fear and surrender. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting heartbeats like a soldier gripping his last line of defense. And with each number, something in the room tracked the rhythm, matching it, almost waiting for me to lose count. I told myself it would stop when morning came. But morning didn't bring peace, just the memory of a presence that left before sunrise yet stayed behind in my thoughts. The second time, a prayer warrior nearly died in her sleep. She was the kind who prayed until her voice cracked, the kind no one believed could be touched by anything beyond exhaustion. But she confessed to me later, almost whispering as though the walls could hear. I felt hands on my throat, and I couldn't even call Jesus by name. She said her breath thinned like thread being pulled through a needle, steady at first, then tightening until her prayer was trapped inside her chest. When she woke, her pillow was soaked. Not from tears, but from the fight her spirit endured while her body lay helpless. Doctors said stress, friends said nightmares, but she and I shared a look that needed no explanation, because I knew the position she'd fallen asleep in. And she swore this part with shaking fingers. She'd prayed harder that night than she had in months. Yet the attack began after the final amen, the moment her body shifted into the same posture that had held me captive. The third time, I realized witches target people lying exactly this way. It wasn't a rumor. It was a pattern hidden beneath testimonies people were too afraid to string together. I met a man who spent his youth studying what most people avoid even naming. He didn't speak loudly, didn't exaggerate. He simply told me what he had seen in quiet rituals behind closed doors. They search for still bodies facing upward. It's easier for them to reach what hovers when the chest is exposed and the head is aligned. They wait for the moment when sleep loosens the tongue from the spirit. I didn't want to believe him. But his eyes held the same recognition mine did, as if we both witnessed something that followed us from dream to waking life. That was the night I stopped questioning whether this was coincidence. Because coincidence doesn't repeat itself with such precision. And before this testimony ends, before I finish what I've started, I'll show you how to reverse it, how to close what was opened without your permission, how to reclaim the ground taken while you were motionless. But only if you're still here, only if your heart is steady enough to hear the next part, because once I say it, you won't sleep the same way again. If you want me to continue, I'll take you deeper. She came to me pale, eyes clouded like someone carrying weight she couldn't name. A young woman, barely in her mid-20s, yet she moved as though every step borrowed strength she did not possess. Her voice shook when she said the first sentence. I pray every night, yet something keeps finding me. She was careful with her wording, as if saying too much might make things worse. I recognized the look. People who feel visited but have no language to explain it. For weeks, she woke exhausted, no matter when she slept or how early she prayed. Every dream wrapped itself in shadows and pressure. Every night she felt hands on her chest, weight she couldn't lift, breath caught between her ribs like someone was stealing air little by little. She told me she tried what everyone advised: worship music through the night, midnight prayers, writing down verses, fasting until she trembled. But nothing shifted. Instead, the heaviness increased. The nightly assaults came earlier, bolder, deeper. She whispered one line, barely audible, yet I heard the crack in it. I'm starting to wonder if God can't hear me anymore. Her words struck harder than she knew. Because that was exactly how I once felt, when I thought devotion alone was enough. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked her to do something simple: sleep while I stayed in the room, just once. She hesitated, embarrassed, but exhaustion eventually pushed her past pride. Midnight came. The house settled. She lay down, made her usual prayers, covered herself with the blanket like armor, exhaled, and then, without thought, rolled onto her back, hands resting over her stomach, feet slightly apart, chin lifted. My breath caught. It was the position I feared most, the one I recognized too well, the one I once trusted without knowing what it could invite. I waited. Minutes passed. Her breath slowed. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids. And then I saw it. Her chest tightened as though an unseen weight pressed downward. Her fingers twitched, then froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound escaped. I leaned close enough to hear her breathing turn shallow, rapid, struggling. I whispered her name. She couldn't respond. Her eyelids fluttered like someone fighting from a place deeper than sleep. The air in the room felt charged, not cold, not warm, but heavy with meaning I couldn't ignore. Everything in me wanted to shake her awake, break whatever held her still, but I forced myself to wait, to understand. Then, slowly, her breath steadied. The moment I turned her onto her side, the pressure lifted, her hands relaxed, her jaw unclenched, sleep became quiet, uninterrupted. By morning, she woke with confusion written across her face. Did I sleep, normally, for the first time? I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I simply said, change the way you rest, stay off your back, guard that posture. She thought it was coincidence at first, but night after night, the attacks weakened, her strength returned, her dreams stopped suffocating her. Her mornings no longer felt stolen. What she never realized, what I wrestled with long after, was this: her prayers were strong. Her faith was steady, but her posture lowered the gate. And once that gate lifted, all the words she spoke in daylight had to fight harder in the dark. I carry that truth like a weight even now, not as a warning to her alone, but as confession of what I once endured. There are wars people never see, and sometimes the first battlefield is the way we lie when the world finally goes quiet. If you're still with me, and ready for what comes next, comment, I'm listening. The position looks harmless, innocent, comfortable. People do it without thinking, hands resting across the chest or stomach, feet stretched out, chin lifted just slightly. But spiritually, it signals surrender, and witches look for that sign. I never understood why until I left the craft and tried sleeping like that again. I expected peace, expected a clean break after my confession, after I renounced everything I once embraced. Instead, something changed instantly, and not for the better. The first night after walking away, I laid down with the confidence of someone who thought deliverance erased every trace of the past. I thought I was finally free. I whispered a prayer, turned onto my back, folded my hands right over my chest. The same way I used to when casting before sleep, back when my heart was made of questions, and my mind ran wild with control I never truly had. I didn't realize I had returned to the very gesture we used before entering dream state rituals. The gesture that meant, I open my gates, I yield. In the craft we said those words aloud. I hadn't said them that night, but my posture did the talking. I didn't fall asleep gently. It was abrupt, as if consciousness was yanked from me instead of drifting away. And then the visions came, sharper than dreams, clearer than memories. I saw a circle of faces I used to sit with, eyes closed, mouths unmoving, yet I could hear them. a low hum beneath their silence, the same sound we used to make to steady the mind before sending intent outward. I wanted to scream that I was no longer part of them, that I had chosen freedom, that I walked away clean, but in that dream state, my voice didn't belong to me. I felt a pull, deep, steady, familiar, like someone tightening a rope I didn't remember tying. Then one of the faces turned toward me. No blinking, no movement, just recognition, as if they'd been waiting for that moment to confirm what I had feared. Leaving physically is not the same as closing spiritual access. I woke drenched, heart slamming against my ribs, unable to tell if I had shouted or simply breathed too hard. The air felt heavy, not with presence but with memory. I thought it was just trauma resurfacing, echoes from a life I abandoned. So I tried again the next night, and again the same posture, the same instinct, betrayed me. This time the dream wasn't filled with faces, it was one voice, clear, direct, close enough to sound like breath brushing my ear. You left your body open, you prayed, but you never shut the door. I woke up clutching my own hands, the way a warrior grabs his armor too late. I sat up, tried to convince myself it was only my mind processing change, but the silence afterward carried weight. Not the weight of threat, the weight of unfinished war. I didn't sleep the third night. I paced instead, whispering prayers I meant with everything in me. I stood by the window until dawn, watching the streets grow lighter while my pulse stayed tense, as if expecting someone or something to arrive. And when the sun broke through and the birds began, I thought the warfare was finally over. But a revelation unfolded slowly, like pages turning without hands. The posture I chose wasn't habit, it was a sign. A signal. A flag raised in silence that only certain spirits recognize. I had walked away from the craft externally, but internally, my body still remembered how to yield. That was when I understood the part I never said in testimony, the part that felt too strange to admit. Deliverance frees the soul, but the body still carries codes. Codes learned through repetition, through practice, through rituals disguised as routine. I hadn't just been wrestling sleep. I had been wrestling memory, allegiance, permission. And the warfare wasn't done with me. It had only begun following me into the realm where speech ends and posture speaks. I told myself I was imagining it. Until the fourth night, when I slept on my side and woke with complete silence in my dreams. No voice, no pull, no faces. That's when the truth settled like a verdict I hadn't asked for. Your body speaks when your mouth is silent, and heaven hears, but so does everything else. I wasn't ready to admit this publicly yet, but privately, in prayer, in trembling honesty, I whispered a confession. I didn't just abandon the old life, I carried its posture into the new one. And the moment I said those words, I felt something shift, as if acknowledging the battlefield revealed where to stand. But that was only the beginning. The real revelation, the one I never wanted to face, came later. And it's the reason I'm still cautious about how I rest when the lights go out. If you want me to go deeper, I will. I didn't think anyone else would understand what I'd been through, until I heard the pastor's testimony, spoken in a voice that carried both authority and exhaustion, as though he'd been fighting a battle few recognized. He said it began quietly, almost privately. One member after another came to him with the same confession, spoken in different words but soaked in the same fear. Pastor, I feel watched when I sleep. Something calls my name, but when I wake up, nothing is there. I try to shout Jesus, my mouth won't move. They described weight on their chest, ears filled with a sound that wasn't quite breathing, their bodies frozen while something hovered inches from their consciousness. And every time the pastor responded the way he'd been trained. He prayed. He anointed their heads. He laid hands on them with faith that shook walls, but couldn't shake whatever gripped them at night. For a while, he believed his efforts were enough. But after the fifth testimony, after another church member said they woke up unable to breathe, feeling watched yet alone, the pastor felt a quiet frustration settle inside him. Not anger at the people, anger at the silence of results. He told us later, he stayed up that night, Bible open, eyes burning, asking why his prayers sounded strong yet landed weak against what his members faced. That was when he remembered someone from long ago. A man he avoided mentioning publicly, a former practitioner of things the church does not name casually. They had met years earlier before the pastor had fully surrendered his life. Back then, this man had told him, some doors don't open through desire, they open through alignment. The pastor never understood what those words meant until he saw the same pattern appearing in every testimony he received. They all slept the same way. Back flat, hands folded over their middle, a position that looks peaceful, but, according to the ex-occult mentor, signals a readiness to receive. The pastor wrestled with the idea. How could something so small, something so natural, play such a role in circumstances that left grown adults trembling? Still desperate for answers, he invited the former practitioner for a private conversation. No cameras, no recording, only truth. The man didn't waste time. He didn't speak in riddles. He simply said, when the body lies like that, the spirit eases its guard. Change the posture and watch what changes with it. The pastor went home heavy with the weight of that statement, not because he doubted, but because deep down he recognized the echo of what he had once ignored in his own life. So the next Sunday, he stood before his congregation. No theatrics, no raised voice, just a quiet authority that made people lean in. He told them, if the enemy seeks opportunity, don't give your rest as an offering. Adjust your posture, guard your night. Some did, some laughed nervously, some whispered that it sounded too simple. But those who listened began reporting something different. 3 weeks. That's how long it took before testimonies shifted. The woman who used to wake up gasping said sleep felt clean again. The young man who heard his name whispered said the silence finally returned, not empty but peaceful. And the older gentleman who once felt frozen said he woke up one morning with a calm he hadn't felt since childhood. The pastor didn't boast. He didn't claim victory. He simply said protection doesn't end with prayer. Sometimes it begins with where you place your body while your spirit rests. When he finished speaking, the room was silent, not confused, reflective, as though everyone was counting the nights they gave away without realizing. And as he stepped aside, he asked just one question. A question that lingered in the room long after service ended. A question that presses itself into my own confession even now. Type protection. If you've ever felt spiritually attacked while sleeping. If you want me to continue, I'll tell you what happened after those 3 weeks. And why the pastor's warning became my turning point too. Before I reveal the position, you need to know why it matters. Because if you change the posture without changing the meaning, the attacks will find another doorway. People ask why some prayers feel strong in the morning and hollow at night. Why the same verse that breaks chains at sunrise can feel like empty breath once you lie down. I didn't understand either, until the conflict reached a point I couldn't ignore. That night, weeks after my first encounter, I went to bed with determination instead of fear. I told myself I would stay awake just long enough to prove nothing waited for me. But somewhere between conviction and exhaustion, sleep pulled me under again. And the sequence repeated. My back against the mattress, hands resting over the center of my chest, legs straight, breath steady. It was too familiar, like I had walked into a room where the furniture hadn't moved since the last battle. This time, the whisper didn't just respond to my breathing. It matched the rhythm of my heartbeat, pulse for pulse, as if tracking my resolve. In that moment, I remembered something I once heard from an elder who never exaggerated anything. Some postures resemble surrender in the unseen realm, not the kind that gives peace, but the kind that signals vacancy. At the time, I brushed it off. Now I felt the weight of those words sitting on my chest more heavily than any blanket. I tried to speak, to mutter a prayer, anything, but the silence inside my mouth felt sealed, like a door held shut from the other side. Only my thoughts were still mine. So I prayed inwardly, every word echoing like footsteps in a hallway. I am here. I am aware. I am guarded. But the whisper pressed closer as though it wanted to challenge that statement. Then something happened I still struggle to describe. It felt like a memory was placed inside me. A flash, an impression, a moment that didn't belong to my own life. I saw a person long ago lying the same way, back flat, hands resting over the heart. And around them, figures watched silently, waiting for a single unspoken permission. That image hit me harder than sound. It was a revelation and a confession at once. Revelation, because I finally understood what posture communicates without words. Confession, because I realized I had been signaling vulnerability even while calling it rest. My breath quickened, my mind raced. The whisper thickened into a presence unlike anything I had felt, not touching me, but waiting, like a decision hung between us. I forced myself to move even a fingertip, and when it finally responded, the moment shattered. My arms slid to the side, my body turned slightly, and the whisper faded instantly, as if that small shift was enough to change the entire message I was sending. I lay there, wide awake now, trembling but aware, and that was when I finally understood the heart of the conflict. The warfare begins before sleep, but the final stance is chosen after your last prayer. Your posture becomes your declaration, and declarations are heard. I spent the rest of the night thinking about every believer who wondered why their spirit felt exhausted, though their faith felt strong, why they prayed sincerely yet woke up feeling drained, confused, unsettled. Why comfort in the body sometimes invites struggle in the unseen. Because the war doesn't end when you say amen. It simply waits for your next position. Now you understand why the posture matters. But understanding alone isn't protection, because if you change the posture without changing the meaning, every doorway you close will force them to search for another. And they always search. If you're ready, I'll tell you what that posture really signals, and which one guards you without a word. I wrestled with denial for months, telling myself posture couldn't matter, that a prayer whispered with trembling faith should be enough. But the more I ignored what was happening, the more the nights pressed against me like a declaration waiting to be signed. There came a point when I couldn't pretend anymore. The pattern was too precise, too consistent, too direct. Every encounter, every questioning voice, every weight in the darkness traced back to the same moment. The way I lay before sleep swallowed my awareness. So I began watching myself the way a watchman studies the horizon, not for what is seen, but for what approaches without footsteps. And what I found is what I never wanted to admit aloud. The posture is simple, almost too simple, which is why so few question it. Sleeping flat on your back with your arms open, palms exposed, chest uncovered, nothing crossed, nothing guarded, nothing held close. At first glance, it looks peaceful, a posture that mimics rest. But symbolically, it tells another story. I finally understood why those nights felt different, why the whisper waited for that angle of my ribs and arms, why silence had an audience whenever I drifted into that shape. This posture isn't just lying down, it resembles surrender. Not the surrender we speak of in faith, but the kind used in other paths where control is exchanged for access. I came across writings, old ones, where this position was compared to an open gate. In those traditions, when the chest faces upward and nothing shields the heart, it represents yielding of will. A wordless gesture saying, I am here, I am reachable. I trembled when I read further, because this was the same posture used in summoning rites, where the body becomes a signal, a silent beacon. Arms opened, chest exposed, breath steady, a shape that mirrors invitation. I didn't need anyone to persuade me. I had lived the consequences, and the realization cut deeper than I expected. Believers unknowingly sleep in the same doorway others use to communicate. That sentence followed me for weeks. I wrote it down, I crossed it out, I rewrote it again. Because each night I returned to that posture, even by accident, the presence returned with it. No prayer felt thick enough to shield me while my body signaled openness without my intention. I wish I could say this was theory, but it became testimony. A confession I hesitated to voice because it meant admitting something took place beyond my explanations. When I shifted to other positions, arms folded across the chest or turned to the side, the night stayed quiet. Not empty, just guarded. As if the message was clear. Faith covers the spirit, but posture reveals the gate. And here's the part I only say once, because every syllable carries weight. I didn't learn this from hearsay. I practiced this, and I watched the results. Some nights were battles, some were warnings, and one was a revelation I'll share next if you choose to walk further with me. Because the story doesn't end with a position, it moves into what answered it. If this surprised you, write, I receive wisdom. And when you're ready, I'll tell you what entered the room the night I refused to turn away. I used to think waking up exhausted was just life pressing down, responsibilities, stress, the quiet weight of unspoken thoughts. But after those nights when I woke with my own breath feeling foreign, I knew it wasn't only life that drained me. Something had been feeding on the hours I surrendered without caution. I tried to deny it. But denial doesn't erase memory, especially memory that feels like someone else shared your sleep. So I began to watch my nights the way warriors watch borders, slowly, patiently, silently. The fourth night was when the revelation took form. I didn't hear a voice this time. Instead, I felt an unseen presence withdraw. Not because I prayed longer, not because I begged stronger, but because I changed how I rested. I shifted to my side, hands close to my chest, as though protecting something fragile within. It felt natural yet deliberate, like instinct returning after years of forgetting. And sleep didn't collapse over me this time. It settled, like a shield being lowered into place. I woke up before dawn with a clarity I couldn't explain. No pressure on my chest, no whisper tracing the edge of my mind, no heaviness like invisible footsteps over my ribs. That was the night I learned something I never wanted to admit. Sometimes protection isn't only spoken, it's positioned. People think spiritual struggle announces itself in grand gestures, but the real conflict begins quietly. You don't notice the first time you surrender ground, because the ground is your sleep, and the surrender is your posture. Here's what I realized. What I am finally willing to confess out loud, because too many wake up weary and assume it's normal. There is a difference between sleep that rests you and sleep that takes from you, and the line between the two is thinner than breath. I didn't share this because I wanted agreement. I'm sharing it because silence benefits the thing that waits for silence. So hear me. If your nights feel long, if your mornings feel heavy, try this. I'm not saying it completes the battle, but it arms you for it. Sleep on your side, hands close to your chest, as if guarding what wakes before your body. It aligns heart and spirit in a way words struggle to explain. Whisper a short prayer before sleep, not lengthy, not dramatic, just enough to declare awareness. Cover yourself spiritually before lying down. Not after, not during, before. So your rest isn't an open field. Do not let your mind wander as you fall asleep. Guard your thoughts the way you guard your speech. The mind that drifts without anchor becomes territory. Some will disagree, but those who try will feel the difference first. And if you ever wake up feeling watched without proof or exhausted without reason, remember what I learned too late. Protection begins where consciousness ends, and posture speaks when your voice grows silent. There is more to tell, but mystery survives for a reason, and some truths refuse to be fully explained unless lived. For now, I leave you with this. Share this with someone who wakes up tired and heavy. They may never admit what they feel, but they will recognize the weight you're naming. I didn't speak of what happened for weeks. I carried it like a sealed letter in my chest. The kind you're afraid to open because you already sense the message is addressed to your spirit, not your mind. I kept replaying that posture, the way my arms rested, the way my breathing shifted, the way silence felt occupied. I thought it was over, until the night I woke up without moving. My eyes opened second, my awareness woke first. And in that thin space between waking and rising, I felt it again. The presence that waits for posture, not permission. That was the moment I understood what so many testimonies overlook. Warfare doesn't always start with words. Sometimes it begins with angles, margins, positions, signals. I'm not proud of my next confession, but I have to say it. I tried to test it. I wanted proof, the kind that doesn't come from sermons or theories, but from direct confrontation. So I lay down a second time in that same posture, as if challenging the unseen to show itself again. And I felt foolish at first. Nothing happened, just the hum of night and the familiar weight of blankets. But then, my breath shortened on its own, as though something counted each inhale, measuring whether I was ready to receive what waited beyond understanding. My eyelids fluttered. My heart echoed in my ribs like a drum in an empty hall. Not fast, just aware. I couldn't move again. But this time, instead of fear, I whispered, "If I am protected, why can this approach?" I didn't hear a voice in reply. I felt the answer, in the way the atmosphere around my body tightened, as if I was being read, as if an old record was being checked to see whether my spirit still belonged to the one I claimed. I'll never forget what I sensed next, because it reshaped how I speak about warfare forever. Protection can be present, and still be weakened when the signal you send contradicts the faith you claim. And that's when the realization struck. Not as fear, but as clarity that demands testimony. Sleeping positions aren't salvation, but they are signals, and if your body sends the wrong signal, the enemy interprets it as permission. I used to think prayer alone sealed every entry point. But here is what I now confess. Sometimes the body bows without bending. Sometimes we surrender without kneeling. Sometimes permission is granted without a word. And if that sounds impossible, remember this. Every ancient practice understood the power of posture. Warriors stood before charging, prophets knelt before speaking, kings lowered their heads before crowning. Why would the unseen operate any differently? There are two more postures even more dangerous than the one I described. Positions that don't just weaken protection but signal availability. I hesitate to reveal them too easily, not because they're secret, but because once you know them, you'll start recognizing when you've used them unknowingly, and when you've welcomed something without realizing it. I'll give everything, the details, the encounter, the revelation, but only if you really want it. If this testimony reaches 5,000 comments, I will show you the final two postures and the night I learned what they cost me. Until then, let me ask you one thing, and answer with honesty. Write, "I'm protected," if you learned something today. Not as a slogan, not as a chant, but as a declaration that you still believe your spirit can be guarded, even when your body forgets the posture of safety. I'll continue when you're ready, but I need to know. Are you listening? I escaped witchcraft, but what I learned there still echoes every night. And before you tell yourself you'd never be touched by that world, remember this. Some attacks don't need a charm, a candle, or a ritual. They only need you to sleep the wrong way. The first presence I ever felt did nothing. It watched, it measured, it waited until I no longer resisted the position that made me vulnerable. But what came afterward was a warfare I could never have imagined. Pause this and write fire if you're still watching. The second night, where testimony begins. I thought I was prepared. I prayed out loud, walked the room, anointed the doorway, covered every corner with words of protection. But when sleep claimed me, I turned again. Hands folded on my chest, feet stretched with a kind of unintentional discipline I never practiced while awake. The moment my spine aligned on the mattress, something leaned close. Not a touch. A presence that didn't need contact to leave deeper marks. My breathing slowed without my permission. My tongue felt heavy as though speech itself had been tied away. And then the whisper returned. Stronger, clearer, closer. It did not say my name. It said what I feared most. You opened the door yourself. I wanted to shout. I wanted to rebuke. But in that posture, authority slipped through my fingers like dust. Have you ever felt watched while sleeping? Comment yes if you know what I mean. The third night, where confession begins. This time, I didn't pray. I wanted proof. I wanted clarity more than comfort. I lay down deliberately, spine straight, palms resting over my stomach, and instantly, as though summoned by position rather than invitation, the air changed. A pressure at my feet, a force hovering at my chest. My heartbeat slowed as if counting down to something unseen. I couldn't move, but my thoughts raced. Every memory of the world I escaped came rushing back. The gatherings, the symbols, the nights where silence meant obedience and posture meant surrender. I had believed I'd left that world behind. What I hadn't realized was this: the body remembers rituals, the spirit tries to forget. Pause this and write fire if you're still watching. What they never tell you about spiritual warfare. In those circles, the ones I fled, they taught something I never understood until I nearly lost myself. The body speaks before the mouth does. If the posture is aligned, the invitation is already sent. I thought they meant discipline. I thought they meant loyalty. I didn't know they meant access. Every time I folded myself into that shape, I was unknowingly echoing the same stance used in those forbidden meetings. The stance of openness, the stance of yielding, the stance of welcome. Share this with someone who wakes up terrified. The night everything broke, I felt breath on my cheek, cold, steady, unwavering. I felt a hand that never touched me, yet held me still. And then came the revelation that turned my testimony into confession. It wasn't the presence that returned. I returned to it. My posture was a language it understood better than prayer. My silence was a response it had waited for. My fear was acknowledgement enough. Some attacks do not require pursuit, just patience. The confession I never wanted to give: I escaped witchcraft. But the knowledge from that world still knocks at my thoughts. I didn't bring artifacts with me, didn't carry objects or markings, yet something followed, the memory of posture, the posture of surrender. Every night since, before I sleep, I check how my body settles. Not out of superstition, but out of understanding. Your posture is not just physical, it's spiritual communication. Guard it like prayer. And remember, some attacks only need you to sleep the wrong way. Pause this and write fire if you're still watching. If you've ever felt a presence while sleeping, comment yes. Share with someone who wakes up terrified. Subscribe so you don't miss the next sleeping posture. Shall I continue with the night I finally fought back, or the posture that closed every door? Your choice.